I was standing in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, rinsing a mug that didn't really need rinsing. The coffee had already gone cold, but I took another sip anyway. Outside, the street was quiet. A delivery truck passed, then nothing. It felt like an ordinary start to an ordinary day. My laptop chimed. One new email. It was from my daughter, Emily. No subject line, just her name. I remember smiling before I opened it, thinking it might be another update about the wedding. We had talked a few weeks earlier about flowers and seating and how quickly Napa books up in spring. The email started with one word, Mom. Not hi, Mom, not dear Mom, just Mom. She wrote that she and her fiancé, Andrew, had finalized the guest list. After a lot of discussion, she said, they had decided it would be best if I didn't attend the ceremony in person. Andrew's mother wanted to keep things intimate. Instead, I could watch through a live stream. She included a Google Meet link. She ended the email with, "It should be just like being there, LOL." I didn't say anything out loud. I didn't feel angry. I just sat there, the mug warming my hands, reading the same lines again. Then I closed the laptop. I replied with 4 words, "Sure, enjoy your big day." I put the phone face down. That morning I still got dressed for work. Same routine, same sweater, same shoes by the door. But later that day, I would be sitting across from someone at a desk with a stack of forms between us. At the time, I didn't know that yet. The drive to the office was quiet. Oregon mornings are like that in early spring. Damp air, gray light, windshield wipers moving even when there's barely rain. I parked in the same spot I always do and walked into Caldwell Walker Law like it was any other Tuesday. I've worked there almost 18 years. I know the sound of the elevator doors. I know which lights flicker. I like order, schedules, files labeled correctly. It's the kind of place where nothing dramatic happens, and that's always suited me. My boss, Robert, stopped by my desk with a latte from the cafe downstairs. He set it next to my keyboard without asking. "Rough morning?" he said. "Didn't sleep much," I told him. That was true enough. I went through contracts, answered emails. The hum of the copier filled the background. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Emily. I didn't pick it up. A few minutes later, another call. Then a text. Then another. I put the phone face down. At lunch, I stayed at my desk. The latte was gone by then. Outside my window, someone laughed on the sidewalk. It sounded distant, like it came from another building. I thought about when Emily was 17, sitting at our kitchen table with college brochures spread out, tapping her pen against her notebook. I thought about the year after my husband died, when everything felt like paperwork and survival. I thought about how often I told myself, just keep things steady. That afternoon, I finished work on time. I shut down my computer. I gathered my purse and coat. The building emptied slowly, the way it always does. Instead of turning toward home, I turned the other way. I drove a few blocks past the office, past the bakery and the dry cleaner, and pulled into the parking lot of my bank. I sat there for a moment with the engine off. Cars came and went. The glass doors opened and closed. Then I went inside. I took a number. I waited. When my name was called, I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked toward the desk. That's where I'll stop for now. Carlos was already standing when I reached his desk. He smiled the way people do when they recognize you, not because they have to, but because they've seen you enough times to know your habits. He had helped me set up college savings accounts years ago. He had adjusted my retirement contributions after my husband died. We had sat across from each other through a lot of quiet decisions. "Mrs. Collins," he said, gesturing to the chair, "what can I help you with today?" I set my purse down by my feet and folded my hands in my lap. The office smelled faintly of toner and coffee. A printer hummed somewhere behind us. "I need to cancel a wire transfer," I said. He paused, fingers hovering over his keyboard. The one scheduled for later this week? Yes. He nodded slowly and turned to his screen. I watched his eyes move as he read. I stayed still. There was no rush. People forget how much of banking is waiting. That transfer hasn't processed yet, he said after a moment. You're within the window. That's good, I replied. He looked at me again, just briefly. It's a large amount. I know. Carlos turned the monitor slightly so I could see the details. The venue name, the amount, the date, all neat and official like any other transaction. There may be a cancellation fee, he said, but it won't be significant. That's fine. He hesitated, then asked carefully, May I ask if everything's okay? The circumstances changed, I said. That was enough. He didn't push. He clicked through a few more screens, printed 2 forms, and slid them across the desk. The paper felt heavier than it should have, or maybe my hands were just tired. I signed where he pointed, once, then again. There, he said, collecting the pages. It's canceled. I nodded. I didn't feel anything dramatic, just settled. As I stood to leave, he added, If you need anything else, you know where to find me. I do, I said. Outside, the air felt cooler than before. I sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. I checked my phone. 9 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 1 from my son, Luke. I didn't listen. I put the phone face down. At home, the house greeted me the way it always does, quiet, familiar. I hung my coat. I set my keys in the bowl by the door. I poured myself a glass of red wine I'd been saving since Thanksgiving. I hadn't opened it then. Emily had canceled her visit last minute. I carried the glass out to the porch and sat down. The wood creaked under the chair. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then stopped. I watched the sky fade from gray to blue. I thought about all the years that led up to that email. The nights I stayed late at the office so Emily could take unpaid internships. The checks I wrote without hesitation. The plane tickets. The deposits. The quiet assumption that I would always step in. I never kept track. I never needed to, until someone else did. When my phone rang again, I finally looked. Luke's name. I answered this time. Mom, he said, already tense. Why aren't you answering Emily? I've been busy, I said. She's upset. I imagine she is. There was a pause. I could hear traffic on his end. Did you cancel the payment? Yes. She's counting on that money. I know. He exhaled sharply. Andrew's parents are furious. I took a sip of wine. That's unfortunate. Mom, he said, lowering his voice, you're making this harder than it needs to be. I didn't respond right away. I watched a leaf skitter across the porch floor. I'll talk to you later, I said. Mom. I ended the call. I stayed outside until the glass was empty and the light was gone. Then I went inside, washed the mug from that morning, and set it upside down to dry. That night, someone rang the doorbell. I stood up slowly and walked toward the door. I opened the door to find Luke standing on the porch. His tie was loosened, his jacket draped over one arm. He looked like he had come straight from work, like he hadn't planned to be there long, only long enough to fix something. Mom, he said, stepping inside before I could answer. We need to talk. I closed the door behind him. The house felt smaller with another person in it. He paced the living room, phone in his hand, screen lighting up every few seconds. Emily's panicking, he said. The venue called. The payment didn't go through. They're saying they'll release the date. I set my wine glass on the counter. I'm aware. He stopped pacing and looked at me. You can't just pull the money like that. I can, I said, and I did. He ran a hand through his hair. Andrew's parents are covering most of it, but they were counting on you for the rest. I was told to watch the wedding through a screen, I said. My voice stayed even. I adjusted my plans accordingly. "That's not fair," he said. "It's not personal." I leaned against the counter. The clock on the wall ticked. It was personal enough to send me a link. Luke sighed, frustrated. "You always take things too seriously." I didn't answer right away. I waited until the ticking felt loud again. "I took care of things seriously," I said. "For a long time." He shook his head. "You're punishing her." "I'm responding," I said. "There's a difference." His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, then back at me. "She says if you just send the money, they can talk about you attending." I looked at him. "After." He frowned. "What?" "After the funds," I said. "That's the order." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The room stayed quiet. "You always do this," he said finally. "You make everything about you." That was when I stood up straight. "Luke," I said, "you're in my house." He stared at me, surprised. "And I'm not having this conversation," I continued. "Not tonight." "So what, you're just done?" he asked. "I'm finished being negotiated with," I said. He looked around the room like he was seeing it differently. The old couch, the framed photos, the lamp that still leaned slightly to the left. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Then it should be easy to leave," I said. He stood there for a few seconds longer. Then he picked up his jacket and walked to the door. He didn't slam it. The click of the latch sounded louder than it should have. I stayed where I was after he left. I didn't move right away. I listened to the house settle back into itself. The refrigerator hummed. The clock kept ticking. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel guilty. I felt clear. The next morning, I woke up early. My phone was full of notifications, missed calls, messages, voicemails stacked one after another. I didn't open any of them. I made coffee. I stood at the counter and drank it while the light came up through the window. Then I got dressed and went to work. At my desk, I reviewed documents and answered emails. Around mid-morning, a new message appeared in my personal inbox. The subject line read, "Please don't ruin my wedding." I didn't open it right away. I opened the email during a quiet moment between calls. The office was still, the kind of stillness that settles in before lunch. I read it once, then again, slowly. Emily wrote that they had lost the venue deposit, that the caterer was threatening to walk, that Andrew's parents were angry and saying this situation proved certain things about me. She said we could talk about my attendance, but first they needed the funds restored. I stared at the screen. The words felt careful, arranged, not apologetic, strategic. I closed the email and went back to my work. I finished reviewing a contract. I returned a phone call. I stood up to refill my water and watched the copier spit out pages, one after another. Around noon, Robert stopped by my desk. "Lunch?" he asked, holding his jacket. That Italian place down the street finally opened. Normally, I would have said no. I always did. But that day, I nodded. "All right." The restaurant was quiet, still figuring itself out. Soft music, the smell of bread and garlic. We sat near the window. Outside, people walked past carrying coffee cups, bags, small plans. Halfway through our meal, Robert looked at me and said, "You seem lighter today." I thought about that for a moment. Then I told him the truth. About the email, about the live stream, about the bank. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing when to stop solving problems that aren't yours anymore." I let that sit between us. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, briefly, then went back to his pasta. When I returned to the office, my phone was full again. Messages, calls, notifications stacked so tightly they blurred together. I didn't answer. That evening, I pulled into my driveway just as the porch light came on. Someone was sitting on the front steps. For a second, I thought it might be Emily. My chest tightened, then eased when I realized it wasn't. It was Sophia, Emily's best friend since childhood. She stood when she saw me, smoothing her coat. "Mrs. Collins," she said softly, "I'm sorry to come by like this." "It's fine," I said, unlocking the door. "Would you like some tea?" Inside, the kettle filled the kitchen with its familiar sound. Sophia looked around, taking in the photos, the shelves, the corners that hadn't changed. "She's a mess," Sophia said. "They lost the venue. The florist dropped out. Andrew's parents are threatening to cancel everything." I set 2 mugs on the counter. "Is that why you're here?" She hesitated. She wanted me to ask if there's anything she can say or do. The kettle clicked off. I poured the water slowly. "No," I said. Sophia looked down at her hands. "Not even if she apologizes?" I handed her the mug. "Words are easy when people are desperate." She nodded. We stood there quietly for a moment, steam rising between us. "I understand," she said finally, "even if she doesn't." She didn't stay long. She thanked me, hugged me gently, and left. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. The house was quiet again. I washed the mugs. I turned off the lights. I went to bed. The wedding didn't happen the way they planned. I didn't hear that right away. Life kept its usual pace. I went to work. I made dinner. I slept through the night. A few days passed before Luke called again. This time his voice was flat, worn down. "They couldn't hold the date," he said. "Everything was booked, or too expensive." I listened without interrupting. "They're doing something smaller," he added, "later, in Andrew's parents' backyard." "That makes sense," I said. There was silence on the line. Then, "You're really not going, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm not." He didn't argue. He just said goodbye and hung up. A week later, Emily sent one more email. It was long, careful. She said she was hurt. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far. She explained pressures and misunderstandings. She wrote about stress and expectations and how everything had gotten out of hand. I read it once. I didn't respond. I archived it. At work, nothing changed. Files still needed organizing. Phones still rang. Robert still brought coffee some mornings. One afternoon, a courier dropped off a certified envelope at the front desk. It was addressed to me. Inside was a refund notice from the venue. Partial, official. Numbers printed neatly at the bottom. I folded the paper and put it in my drawer. Weeks passed. The wedding happened quietly, according to Luke. A few relatives, Andrew's parents, no music beyond a small speaker, no photographer, no flowers beyond what someone picked up that morning. I wasn't mentioned, and I didn't need to be. One evening after work, I stopped by a pottery studio near my house. I had seen the sign for years and never gone in. The room smelled like clay and warm air. Shelves were lined with half-finished bowls and mugs. I signed up for a class. At home, I rearranged a few things, donated clothes I didn't wear anymore, cleaned out a drawer that had held old receipts and birthday cards. I moved slowly, deliberately. Sometimes my phone buzzed, sometimes it didn't. One afternoon, while waiting for a kiln cycle to finish, a woman from my class sat beside me. She talked about her sister, about money, about boundaries she wished she had set sooner. I listened. That night I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where so many checks had been written, the same place where that email had been opened. The house felt steady, quiet in a good way. I rinsed my mug when I was done and set it upside down to dry. Then I waited, and this time the waiting felt different. The mornings are quieter now. I wake up without checking my phone right away. I make coffee and stand at the counter while it brews, listening to the low hum of the machine and the soft sound of the house waking up with me. Some days I read, Some days I just sit. Nothing feels urgent anymore. Work stays the same in the best way. Contracts, files, routines. Robert still stops by now and then. We don't talk about the wedding. We don't need to. There's an understanding that some chapters close without announcements. On weekends, I go to my pottery class. My hands are still clumsy with the clay, but I like the way it pulls back, the way it requires patience instead of force. I've made a few bowls that wobble slightly. I keep them anyway. Emily doesn't call much. When she does, it's careful, polite. We talk about neutral things, weather, work, nothing heavy, nothing owed. I don't push. I don't explain. I don't fill the silence for her. Luke checks in once in a while. He sounds tired, older somehow. We talk about his job, his house. I don't bring up money. Neither does he. One evening, while sorting through mail, I find an old envelope tucked into a drawer. Inside is a handwritten note from years ago. Emily, in her teenage handwriting, thanking me for helping her move into her first apartment. I read it once, then put it back where I found it. Some memories don't need revising. Last week, a woman from my pottery class asked if I could help her look over some paperwork, a family issue, financial. She said she wasn't sure how to say no without feeling selfish. I told her I'd take a look. Nothing more. That felt right. At night, I lock the door, turn off the lights, and sit for a few minutes before bed. The house holds its shape. The quiet feels earned. I put the phone face down. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If it felt familiar, you're not alone. If you'd like, go ahead and like the video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read them more often than you might think. 2 popular stories will be appearing next, and I'll be here for those too.